The United States has national parks devoted to canyons and deserts, glaciers and geysers, even underwater coral reefs. 63 national parks in all. But somehow we skipped the American prairie.
When scientists released 5,000 bison into what many believed was a dying Texas landscape, critics thought they were making a costly mistake. The land had been degrading for decades, and experts believed recovery would take generations, if it happened at all. But within just 2 years, something extraordinary unfolded. The transformation happened so quickly that even researchers questioned the results. Join us as we uncover how these iconic animals transformed a collapsing ecosystem, how the prairie lost its way. Before the bison returned, this part of Texas was a shadow of what it had once been. The region had originally been a thriving prairie covered with native grasses that supported countless plants and animals. But over decades, that balance slowly disappeared. The biggest reason wasn't drought or wildfire. It was the way the land was being grazed. At first glance, cattle and bison seem similar, but the way they shape the land couldn't be more different. Cattle are selective grazers. They repeatedly eat the most nutritious plants while leaving tougher shrubs and woody vegetation behind. Over time, the healthiest grasses disappear, allowing invasive plants to spread. Their movement creates another problem. Instead of constantly traveling, cattle often stay close to familiar water sources and return to the same grazing areas. Some parts of the prairie become overgrazed, while others are left untouched. Eventually, neither area functions the way a healthy grassland should. In this part of Texas, one plant took full advantage of that imbalance: the mesquite tree. Year after year, mesquite spread across the prairie, replacing native grasses with dense woody scrub. By 2010, scientists had officially reclassified much of the area as semi-arid scrubland. The prairie was nearly gone. The damage went far beyond what people could see. Without thick grass roots holding the soil together, rainwater no longer soaked into the ground. Instead, it ran across the surface, carrying valuable topsoil away with it. The earth became hard, dry, and compacted, making it even harder for new plants to grow. It was a vicious cycle. Less grass meant harder soil. Harder soil meant even less grass. Healthy soil continued disappearing, making natural recovery even harder. As that disappeared, the land slowly lost its ability to recover naturally. Millions of dollars were spent trying to reverse the damage. Machines cleared mesquite trees. Native grasses were replanted. Large irrigation projects were launched, but nothing lasted. The desert kept reclaiming the land. Eventually, many people believed the prairie was simply beyond saving. Then researchers proposed an idea that sounded almost too simple to work. Instead of relying on more machines or expensive restoration projects, what if they simply brought back the animals that had shaped this landscape for thousands of years? Could restoring one missing species really bring an entire ecosystem back to life? The experiment that changed everything. In 2019, scientists decided to find out. Rather than releasing a small test herd, they made a bold decision. Around 5,000 plains bison were released across roughly 150,000 acres of degraded Texas grassland. Many people thought the plan was reckless. Local ranchers worried the already struggling land couldn't support such a massive herd. Even some scientists believed the project was moving far too quickly. Traditional conservation starts small. This project didn't. Researchers believed only a full-sized herd could restore the prairie naturally. It was a huge gamble, and during the first few weeks, critics believed their fears had been confirmed. The bison looked destructive. Unlike cattle, they didn't slowly graze one patch of grass before moving on. They traveled together in large groups, eating vegetation down to the ground, trampling shrubs, rubbing against mesquite trees, and leaving behind churned-up soil. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like total chaos. But appearances can be deceiving. The prairie had evolved alongside bison for thousands of years. Native grasses were built to survive intense grazing. Instead of dying when eaten, they respond by growing deeper root systems and spreading underground. Heavy grazing actually stimulates many prairie grasses, encouraging them to become stronger. Mesquite trees, however, had never adapted to that kind of pressure. As thousands of bison moved across the landscape, young mesquite plants struggled to survive. Within the first year, mesquite coverage dropped dramatically in the busiest grazing areas, something that would have cost millions of dollars using heavy machinery. The bison were also improving the soil without anyone directing them. Each animal naturally spread fertilizer across the landscape every day, feeding insects, fungi, bacteria, and countless tiny organisms that healthy soil depends on. Their powerful hooves broke apart hardened ground, allowing rainwater to soak deeper into the earth instead of washing away. Then came one of the most surprising discoveries. Bison create shallow depressions called wallows by rolling on the ground. At first glance, they seem insignificant, but after rainfall, these natural basins collected water that would otherwise have disappeared. Moisture remained in the soil longer. Native seeds, hidden underground for decades, suddenly had the conditions they needed to grow. Plants that hadn't been recorded in parts of Texas for generations began reappearing. Within months, researchers realized they weren't simply watching animals return. They were watching an ecosystem remember how to function. But if the land was recovering this quickly, what would happen when the rest of the wildlife finally returned? When nature took over again. The transformation didn't stop with the grass. As vegetation returned, wildlife slowly followed. Before the bison arrived, the area had become unusually quiet. There wasn't enough food or shelter to support many animals, and predator populations remained low. But as the prairie recovered, the entire food web began rebuilding itself. Coyotes became more common, raising healthy packs near the growing herd. Golden eagle sightings increased dramatically, while black vultures returned in numbers rarely seen in the region. Even smaller creatures played an important role. Native bees, butterflies, and other pollinators returned, helping plants spread across the recovering prairie. The recovery wasn't limited to animals. The soil itself was changing. Scientists measured a significant drop in soil compaction during the first year. Rainwater that once rushed across the hardened surface now soaked into the ground, replenishing underground moisture instead of disappearing into nearby gullies. Streams that had remained dry for years started flowing again. Even mountain lions were eventually spotted in the area, a strong sign that the ecosystem had become healthy enough to support top predators once more. Perhaps the biggest surprise came from above. Satellite imagery showed vegetation spreading much faster than expected. The recovery happened so quickly that some satellite data was flagged for additional review. The prairie wasn't following the timeline scientists had predicted. It was recovering much faster. But the biggest surprise still wasn't the returning wildlife. It was what was happening beneath the surface. Could these animals also be helping fight one of the world's biggest environmental challenges? The result nobody expected. As scientists continued studying the recovering prairie, they discovered something even more remarkable. The healthier grass wasn't just restoring wildlife, it was capturing carbon. Unlike forests, which store much of their carbon above ground in trunks and branches, healthy prairies store enormous amounts underground through deep root systems. As bison grazed, native grasses responded by growing stronger roots, locking more carbon into the soil. Within 2 years, soil samples showed an impressive increase in stored carbon across the restoration area. Researchers estimated that the recovering landscape was removing tens of thousands of tons of carbon from the atmosphere every year, the equivalent of taking thousands of cars off the road. And the bison weren't using expensive technology. They were simply doing what they'd evolved to do for thousands of years. The project also challenged long-held assumptions about conservation. For decades, many experts believed damaged ecosystems could recover only through costly engineering projects and decades of careful management. This experiment suggested something different. Sometimes the fastest way to restore nature isn't by replacing it with technology. It's by bringing back the species that helped build it in the first place. That doesn't mean bison are a magical solution for every damaged landscape. Researchers continue exploring sustainable grazing methods alongside bison restoration. But one lesson became impossible to ignore. Healthy ecosystems evolved over thousands of years. When one important piece disappears, the entire system begins to struggle. When that missing piece returns, nature often responds faster than anyone expects. The Texas Project reminded scientists that restoration isn't always about inventing something new. Sometimes it's about remembering what worked all along. So, was this simply one successful experiment? Or could restoring native wildlife become one of the most powerful conservation tools for rebuilding ecosystems around the world? The return of 5,000 bison didn't just transform one Texas prairie, it changed how scientists think about restoring nature. Maybe the answers to today's biggest environmental challenges have been here all along. What do you think? Could this approach work in other parts of the world? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.